on screen, or not Lori, Tanya, is that true?
Yep, I sure can, and I just started recording.
Great. Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome. So as Tanya said, my name is Erin. It's Erin Koss. I happen to be a CPA and the CEO at Site Consulting Group. We're going to go ahead and jump right in today. And with our presentation, we're going to talk. I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of giving you who we are, letting you know who you're talking to or who's talking at you. We'll cover our main topic, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end today. As Tanya mentioned in the introduction, Erin Koss, and wanted to share a little bit about us today. What we really care about, this is the thing that's most important to us, is creating business value and changing lives. We like to think of every project that we go into as an opportunity to invest in individuals and organizations in a way that can result in quantum leaps forward and have a lasting impact. Today, the folks on our team, they have broad business backgrounds, both business and technical, and have been helping companies develop enterprise resource strategies from the top down, as well as also providing the boots on the ground support once kind of the road trip forward is known. You'll find that we are solution agnostic, so although we have a lot of experience with products, all the Microsoft products, frankly, because we work in a small and mid-sized manufacturing industry, we actually don't buy, sell hardware or software. Or we buy it, but we do not sell it. So we're not a traditional VAR, and we work very much on the client side to help select, implement, and optimize enterprise solutions. We were focused in this way so that we can really help our clients eliminate the guesswork, save time and money, get on the ERP projects that they're trying to get. And I think our secret sauce in this way is the way we really do start from the top, look to help our clients build an enterprise resource strategy, which is really an alignment of company culture, people, processes, and technologies, and aligning those with the objectives or where they want to go. A particular niche for us is focused on manufacturing. We focused here for over 25 years. In more recent years, we really have found our niche in high compliance industries. So things like consumer packaged goods, specifically food and beverage, some medical device and biotechnology as well. What matters to us most and why it matters to us most, as I said, we focus on the client side. So we partner with our clients to help execute ERP change initiatives. And we recognize that not only do we need to be good teammates with them, as well as our own internal staff, but we also usually have a software partner we want to be a partner with on their behalf. And so we really try and be the best teammates that we can be, knowing that we're representing our clients both to their internal partners, external, as well as their solution partners. We're really committed to doing the right thing, dedicated to excellence. We try and be candid always in our communications, but kind at the same time. And we really do strive to have a work-life balance. We do travel somewhat in our industry and in the work we do, and we try and have a real balanced life there as much as we can. So a little bit about some of our clients. Some of these guys are national guys, but we're real, and some of them are more local to the Pacific Northwest. These are companies that we're just really proud to have done business with, and you'll see they represent a lot of the industry and the niches that I was speaking about just a minute ago. So some of you may have been on our webinar last week, and so this is a smidge of a revisit, but it sets the stage for where it is we're trying to go. And I just want to put our conversation into a broader context. So during our last conversation, we talked about how important it is to have an enterprise resource strategy before diving into any single ERP or IT initiative. And so what do we mean by, what is an enterprise resource strategy? Well, first of all, it's your business. It's not software, right? We like to talk about ERP. We know it's software. We know it's an important solution. We know we need it to be competitive, and not the point, right? There's really a bigger conversation or bigger goals that we have here. And what we think of an enterprise resource strategy is truly a plan for utilizing all of an organization's resources to optimize core business processes and accelerate the rate of change. So that's a whole long big sentence, which the key thing I want you to take away from there is all of the organization's resources and that focus on the core business process. Because truly, by doing those two things is what's going to really allow an organization to accelerate their growth and to remain competitive. So the elements of an enterprise resource strategy and the things that we really want to look at all together: company, culture, processes, systems, and technology. You know, our experience in the broader market tells us that when we look at these items together, these resources that a company has available to them, you really find that whenever you take on an initiative within your organization, such as ERP or the technology that supports that, that when you talk about these things together in a single context, you really do have achieve a result that is more flexible, it's more cohesive, it's nimble, and truly is able to make you more competitive. So before you dive into an ERP project, even just an upgrade, or an IT infrastructure upgrade, anything of the like, really we want to take a trip to the mountaintop and look at the big picture. Things like, where are you today? Where are you trying to go? And how are you going to use all of those resources together? You know, this type of planning truly does help you create business value and grow ultimately. So it's not going to be easy. And today, we're going to talk about some of the trade-offs that need to be made and some of the more detailed conversation around people. You know, who do you have on the bus today? Who are you going to need? And what types of skills and experience are they going to need to achieve the outcomes that you desire? At this point in the conversation, we're assuming you've done some version of an enterprise resource strategy and looking at all of those pieces. And you've decided that you need an ERP solution, and you've even completed the selection process. And in the context that we're in today, we figure it's probably a mid-market solution like GP, NAV, or AX. When considering whether the people in your organization are ready for a large ERP project, there's a number of things that we really want to talk about and we want to consider. First off, how large is your organization? How has the organization responded to change in the past? This is a culture question at some level. What resources do you currently have? What are the roles that are required? What are the responsibilities of each of these roles or of these individuals? And finally, which roles should remain in-house or are optionally something you can outsource in order to speed things up, in order to possibly save money? There's some reasons that outsourcing can serve. So today we're going to discuss the roles and responsibilities required by an ERP initiative for small or mid-sized companies. Along the way, we'll highlight whether these roles, as I said, are best served in-house or could optionally be outsourced. Most of the slides you'll find as we go along are you can really view them as a checklist, if you will. These are great tools for after the fact when you go back to your organization and you start asking yourself in these different roles that we talk about today, how prepared are you? So think of these slides as a bit of a checklist as we go along so that you can assess where are you today and where do you have gaps in the folks that you need to really execute on an ERP initiative in the most successful way. All right, so let's discuss specifics, roles and responsibilities. When we talk about the ERP roles for a project or an upgrade or even long-term, these are the roles that we're talking about. The executive sponsor, the project manager, multiple project managers oftentimes, the implementers, what we like to call the core team, subject matter experts, the SMEs, as maybe you've heard the term, users, post-implementation support, and solution experts. So let's begin by talking about the executive sponsor. When we're talking about an executive sponsor, we're typically referring to, in a smaller company, the owner or founder, or their delegate, maybe the accounting professional in this context. For a larger company, we're talking about probably the CFO or senior accounting leadership. Sometimes this can also be IT leadership. Certainly, this is let's talk about their responsibilities. So when the executive sponsor's responsibilities primarily to provide support, encouragement, and convey a message of full support from the management team. So again, smaller companies, this team might be a little smaller. Larger companies, it's going to be certainly larger and more cross-functional. And what we see is their job is to really provide that bridge between the implementation team as well as and the executive team. and be supportive. Next, participate in steering committee meetings. The larger engagements that we see have steering committees that may be comprised of this executive sponsor, the project team leadership, and maybe a few additional folks from the broader executive team as well. Another responsibility for them is to track the progress of the project at a milestone level, meaning they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day details, but they will be holding the project team accountable at each major milestone, and they'll be very vested in reporting back to their leadership team where the team is at in that regard. Next, it's, we really want to make sure and keep these guys informed of identified risks and plans of action, because we want to rely on them to make the big corporate level decisions. So if the team gets stuck or is having challenges, we want to make sure that we've kept them abreast of issues as they come up, risks as they manifest, and what are the action plans that we recommend, at least going with those. But ultimately, that decision making at that level is for them to do. And then finally, to resolve, like I said, resolve corporate level issues. And then you'll see in the bottom right, and we're going to see this kind of infographic a lot as we go through today, this idea of, does this need to be an in-house role? And I think it's pretty obvious that the executive sponsor needs to be an in-house role for obvious reasons. So we'll see that infographic again. Next, let's take a minute and talk about project manager responsibilities. There's two project management roles typically on an ERP engagement, that which exists within the company. So on the company core team, which you're going to hear us talk about a little bit more, a project manager role exists, and I would say is easily one of the most critical roles in getting the value out of the ERP and in executing the implementation process effectively is super key. The other project managers, typically from the VAR, the solution provider, value-added reseller, as we call them. So your GP partner, your NAV partner, they're also going to provide a project manager with you, and those two work together in tandem to deliver a successful ERP implementation. And ultimately, from the company side, that company project manager is accountable for delivery on their side. So let's run through the project manager responsibilities and talk about some of the subtle differences between the two. So again, their job: ensure project success, prepare and manage a project plan, monitor the project team progress, conduct project team meetings, reports to the leadership team, and is responsible for the overall delivery of the project. So now, again, if this is your company and you're getting ready to take on an ERP initiative, it's really important that you find somebody in your organization with the skills to do this type of work. So these are the responsibilities they're going to have, and the first question is, can they do this? The next thing I want to stress is, where at all possible, having somebody on the internal project team that has been through this before, that has some idea of what ERP is about and hopefully has been through this before. What we find is the more experience this project manager has had in the ERP space, has implemented before, has managed, managed complex system engagements, the better served the company is going to be in terms of getting the return on the investment in the long run, and then in the short run, saving time, money, and keeping the project scope in line in order to execute per the expectations of the executive team. Again, the more experience your folks have, the better. So the bottom right, again, going back to our in-house outsourcing conversation, that core team project manager, if you can find this resource in-house, do it all day long, right? Optionally, however, this is a role that is oftentimes outsourced, and it's because a lot of our small and mid-sized companies don't have a resource like this. Everybody is embedded in their functional roles, like customer service, purchasing, finance, and accounting, and project management is not necessarily their core competency. What I love about it when this is the case is that when you find someone, an organization, and I'll be honest, this is something that we do, but when you find an organization that does this well, what you can expect, or what you should expect, is that part of that project manager's role is really to guide and train the people within your organization who are the implementers and the functional experts, and transfer as much of these skills into that team as they can, so that when that external project manager does exit after the implementation, what you're left with is a subset of skills and capabilities that enhance and empower the people that are remaining at the organization. So it's really a way of elevating skills without necessarily having to make that long-term investment potentially in a role that you may not always need. And in fact, our small and mid-sized companies, we find that they don't always need this role long-term. The bigger the company, it's more likely you'll need it. But suffice to say, that outsourced resource should be somebody who can transfer skills and knowledge of that role to your broader team. The solution provider is always an outsourced resource. As we talked about, this solution provider project manager is always going to come from the outside and provides becomes a critical representative, if you will, of their organization, and make sure the resources that they're bringing to the table stay on track and do all of these things from a responsibility perspective, from the VAR's perspective. And we're going to talk more about that as we continue. I think probably the most complex, because there's just more folks and many different roles in this context, is the core implementation team. In this context, we really do have we have three different types of roles. And the one thing I want to point out is we're going to talk about these as we go through in the context of small company versus mid-sized company. So you'll see in the top left there that generally, and again, every company is different, but generally a good gauge is you probably need about 3 people on a small implementation, and maybe 5 to 10 people on a mid to larger implementation on the core team. So 3 roles that we see. The first one is a functional expert. So the number and types of functional experts really are based on the scope of work. How big is your implementation? Roles are the functions we're talking about here, things like finance and accounting, purchasing, customer service, procurement, production, things like that. And what you'll find is again, depending on the size of the implementation, one person may be able to play the role of multiple functions. And again, it depends on your company, but these guys are typically the most knowledgeable folks in the organization. A lot of times they're at a manager level or maybe a senior supervisor level. The key is they have a lot of functional expertise. They have a lot of internal company expertise, and will be able to help the core team make good decisions about the execution of the ERP project. Next, you have a business analyst, folks with a well-rounded combination of business systems and process skills. These are people that can analyze kind of current processes, understand and improve value stream and the requirements relative to the new system. So they can take the as-is, look at it critically, and understand the system and bring all of those things together to create essentially a best practice ERP implementation. Sometimes companies have these people and these skills in-house, but again, the smaller the company, typically this isn't the case. This is an area where outsourcing is oftentimes a very good idea. So let's say you can field a small to mid-size team of implementers from your organization who are highly functional experienced, and you can field them fine. The challenge will be that, gosh, they may or may not have deep or broad ERP experience, and this can be a bit of a gap. How do they, how will you interface with the VAR? How will you work to do what you need to do? And this can be a challenge. And so one of the things we talk about is the business analyst is an area where if you have them in-house, by all means, make sure they are on your core team. And if you don't, this is an area where outsourcing is an opportunity. Again, find somebody from an organization that is really good at transferring those skills to really enhance and empower your functional team for when the implementation is over, because you will have a support need at that point, and we're going to talk more about that. Finally, the technical analyst. These folks are guys that really understand the technology under the hood. So they're the developers and the programmers, and the folks that at a minimum, you're going to want these folks to be able to do the data, the master data and the transactional data imports. We don't often see these skills in-house in the smaller companies. Sometimes we see some of these skills in-house in the larger companies within the IT department, if you have one. But the key thing here is this is a role, again, much like the business analysts, where if you've got them in-house, use them, and this is a great opportunity to grab a solid outside resource and help them use them to enhance your internal team. Again, if you look at the bottom right, I want to talk about something that's relatively key here. You'll see in the bottom right infographic, we're talking a little bit, you see the red kind of highlight around the outsourcing of functional experts. Remember, we talked about these functional experts being people who are not only an expert in customer service and sales order entry and procurement and production, things like that, but they're also the expert in the company. And there is nobody who is going to do that better than somebody who has worked at the company. So what we talk about, we get asked this a lot actually, is, hey, can you help us here? Can you help us, be our finance core team member, be our purchasing core team member? And what we tell clients is the answer is yes, but with a very big qualification, and here's why. So what we like to help folks understand, and I'm going to use this example. Essentially, the idea is to think about is the more you outsource these roles, the functional expert role, the bumpier the ride is going to be, the more challenging the implementation is going to be. The good news is when you outsource the role, they understand how to do ERP. That won't be the challenge. But because there's nobody that can make up for your functional knowledge internally, the road could be bumpier. Maybe some decisions get made that you might have done differently. Or at the end of the day, you still need those functional experts to run the ERP once you've gone live. And so it's sort of pay now or pay later. You're going to have to solve that problem eventually. But it can provide some benefits to have one in there outsourced if time, for example, is your biggest issue. If really you have to get this ERP in because you've got a seasonality issue. You have to start and stop at a certain time, and the only way to do it is to start right now, and you're short a procurement expert, for example. Bringing someone in from the outside might really serve you and be no problem. The extreme of that, however, and I want to use this example just to bring the point home, we actually had a client, a $100 million food and beverage client in Southern California last year, who essentially was trying to do so many things at one time. They were acquiring a company, they had 2 legacy systems, and they were getting ready to take on a Microsoft Nav implementation. And the challenge is their core team, they'd fielded a core team, they had their functional experts, they were good at what they did, but the challenge became is they couldn't show up to play. They could not show up to play on a regular basis. And so the challenge became the thing wasn't getting done. And for this particular company, time was of the essence. They had certain, they had a certain time frame with which they had to implement. And so they outsourced their entire core team to us. And the challenge there became, of course, is then they had to scramble to got it in and we got it done. And you can be on time and on budget in that context. The challenge you have is you need to plan for additional expense down the road. Because now not only do you have to hire those folks, but you sort of have to go through a retraining expert after the fact. So there's a lot of that's kind of the extreme case and a case we don't recommend. So the point being is, if you're going to outsource functional experts, be very careful in how you do that, and be very intentional with why you're doing that. So let's take a few minutes and look at the responsibilities of this team. It's a big list, to be sure. There's a lot of things this team is responsible for. And this is something else I want to highlight. So we're talking about the roles and the responsibilities, and do you have these people in your organization? And if you don't, how do you find them? Do you hire them? Do you find 1 or 2 maybe to help you from the outside? All of those are questions you need to ask. This is a checklist to use. Like, what are these guys going to need to do? And you'll notice that highlighted blue in the bottom left. How much of their time are they going to need to be involved? This is the big question. And when people see this, their eyes get really big and go, God, Is that really the case? And I would say, yes, it is. Again, the thing to think about is, what is most important to you? Time, scope, budget? What matters to you most? So for example, if time is not as important to you, you can have your folks allocated less of their time, and the implementation can take a little longer, no problem. You can absolutely make that choice. If time matters to you, this percentage is spot on. You know, if you've got a certain window with which you want to get this done, then you really do need to make sure that the folks that you are pulling from the organization to field your core team with can be available when they need to be available. Realistically, we see closer to 50% being doable. It's difficult, but it is generally doable and closer to realistic in terms of what most companies can do. And most of the time, the VARs, the value-added resellers anymore, will expect this and talk about this as well going into their relationship with a company also. One final slide about core team members is, you know, we've talked about roles, we've talked about the responsibilities, but this is a big job. And so I want to just talk about it from one other perspective. And that is really from the perspective of what qualities and characteristics should we be looking for in the people within our organizations, or even outside our organizations if we bring help in from the outside. What kind of qualities and characteristics do we want them to have? These projects are long, they're arduous, they're, you know, you're in a room, locked in a room with people, you know, for hours on end, you're working overtime. They can be really stressful. So beyond skills and experience and time, what qualities and characteristics are we talking about? We're talking about knowing how to be a team player. You know these guys in your organization, guys that want to help, that are engaged, that are comfortable with groups of people, things like that. People that really have a heart for a team. Can they see the big picture? So do they understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it? Are they bought in? But can they play very tactically? Are they detail-oriented people? And I can't stress this enough. My project managers certainly need to be multitasking folks, but the people on these core teams need to have an attention to detail sometimes that not everybody has. So this is something to also look at. Are they well respected within their organization? So we're going to put, say, a procurement or a supply chain or a customer service expert, if you will, from the organization onto these teams. We're going to pull them out of the organization and say, hey, you're going to do double duty, do your day job, maybe we'll backfill you a little bit if we can, and we're going to need to have you be in this role. The question is are they someone who is divisive, or they may be great at what they do, but nobody likes them, nobody respects them? Are they well respected? This is going to matter because their role is to make decisions and help to work with those people in the organizations, in the functional departments, to glean information and make decisions. And their support and their respect is going to matter. Do they care about building relationships? This is cross-functionally, this is within their department, this is beyond the core team. So people that can work within the team and then work outside the team and with other people as well. Experienced in their function, we talked about that. And then finally, wants to play. They want to be on the core team. Not everybody does. I have had people join the core team on the implementation team and not want to be there. And it can be a very divisive influence, if you will. It's a very big challenge. And I say maybe for the long term. And what I mean here is, as we look at our core teams and our implementation teams, you want to be on the lookout for folks who may be your longer term point person, your longer term support person. These are going to be the folks with, and you know who they are in your organization. These are folks with kind of a natural affinity for continuous improvement, for process improvement. I call them and I also find that they tend to be good system thinkers, as I call it. You know, they get a hold of technology and they can really make it hum. Guys who can bring that type of thing together, you know who they are in the organization, can be a real win on these teams, and generally want to participate in these types of teams, and can oftentimes be your long-term resource for providing detailed support for your organization post-implementation. And finally, positive good communicator. Again, you know, one comment I always make when I kick off a core team on an ERP implementation is what happens in this room stays in this room unless we provide a broader context. The reason for that is picture this for a minute. You're working side by side with a team of people to execute something new within the organization. New and change is scary. So if you're not day to day immersed in that conversation, if pieces of it, certainly things where maybe there's complaint or challenges, right? It is going to be hard inside that room. Those challenges, if by the water cooler are, oh my gosh, the system had a bug and it did this and it did that and it was all these things and complain. If that type of conversation is happening at the water cooler outside of the core team experience with people outside the core team, they don't have a context like the folks on the team do. And so we really talk to our folks about, hey, stay positive, make sure that you're a good, strong communicator when you're on this team. Those are the folks we're looking for. And when we kick off our core team, it's like, hey guys, unless we provide a broader communication, what's going on in here, and it's not about hiding information, it's about providing context and being intentional in our communication so that we don't blow ourselves up while we're trying to put something new and something that's meant to create business value and help a company grow. While we're trying to do that, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. Next, let's talk about subject matter experts. So these guys are really important to the core team. They are additional functional experts oftentimes, and you can't have, if you remember a couple slides ago, we talked about, hey, a core team for a small company is generally roughly 3 people. For a bigger company, mid-sized company, 5 to 10. So you will have other people that you need information from who sometimes are just the mothership of information within your organization. And two things are true. It may not be possible to pull them out of the organization core team. It may also be that we don't do that because we have what we call core team bloat. So you can only get so much done when you have a team that is too big. So we like to manage the size of these core teams and not make them overwhelmingly large so that they can't get anything done. We want them to be nimble. So we want these subject matter experts. We want to identify who they are going into the project and understand who they are and their value. And we want them to know who they are too, by the way, because we're going to call upon them. And so we may selectively involve them in certain activities along the way throughout the implementation, but most things we will not. They'll be treated like an end user, like all end users that'll be engaged at the training phase and certainly at the cutover and go live phase of an implementation. But they can provide important input to the core team and are highly valuable. Having them involved and communicating effectively with them also really improves buy-in on a broader level. And so you have your core team and you're in that room and you're doing your work and you're getting this the ERP implementation moving forward. Having these guys, the subject matter experts and the end users with more visibility and conversation around what you're doing will really help with buy-in. It'll increase engagement. And then ultimately the goal of goals is to make sure you have adoption once you flip the switch. And so identifying these guys up front is really critical. But again, there are additional functional experts who just for whatever reason can't be on the core team. Let's take a minute as and round out the conversation as we talk about these core team roles, or excuse me, the project team roles, and take a few minutes to just talk about what are you going to need after you go live. As we talked about a little bit as we were going along, it's really important to make sure you have a post-implementation point, person or persons. Depends again on the size of your organization. So if you're a smaller company, what we see typically is these functional experts from the core team typically go back to their day job, but they have a whole nother level of experience they didn't have before. They may have some project management experience. They may be better business analysts. They may, on top of which they're still the functional experts they were when they started. So they have a whole lot more skills than they did when they went in. But they do need to go back to their day job, small company, limited resources. They continue to play a critical support role within their department and probably to a certain degree cross-functionally as the organization continues to optimize the ERP implementation, particularly in that first year, but even beyond that. So, and then finally, the IT person or one of the subject matter experts also could possibly become the point person as well. But suffice to say, it's a little trickier in a small company, but it's typically one of these folks down the road. At the end of the day, the critical point to take home, I think, for the small company is whoever that is, make sure you have a point person. And this person will continue to interface with the organization, with the value-added reseller to make sure that as you optimize, you're doing so in a smart, cost-effective way, much like you did on a much faster track during the ERP implementation. For mid-sized companies, we typically will see a new role created. So while you may have outsourced a business analyst here or there, you may have outsourced your project manager or a technical analyst, at the end of the day, you don't want to rely on those resources long-term and will likely need to hire somebody internally. Now, what we find is that's not always the case that you have to hire somebody, but that maybe someone within that functional expert group that was on your core team, again, that system thinker, the process improvement thinker, really has an affinity and a passion for playing this role. We'll oftentimes see that person pulled out of their functional role and that role backfilled as they possibly move into maybe reporting to the accounting leadership or going into the IT department if you have one, is very often the case. So no ERP implementation gets completed successfully without substantial help from the solution provider and their team of experts. And I want to just spend a minute in reviewing their role and discussing some trends we're seeing, particularly in the middle market. Their primary role, again, remember, they're going to provide a project manager to interface with your project manager, but their key role is really to help their experts are going to be their own business analysts, people in the finance function, the operations function, for example, and they're going to provide these experts to play a key role in configuration, piloting, and go-live support. They can provide really valuable technical skills during and after implementation. And I would, especially in this day and age, expect them to be remote most of the time, except for key events like possibly kickoff or a pilot, a second pilot, maybe cut over and go live. The smaller the company, we typically see them on site less. Larger companies, the complexity is higher, the projects are longer, there's more people involved, we might see them on site more frequently. One of the trends that we're seeing here, and we really like to coach companies to be aware of, is most of the middle market solution providers are taking a very prescriptive approach, meaning they have a very set way they're doing their implementations now. For them, that's about controlling costs. It's also about controlling, well, and kind of along those same lines, controlling their own resources and their own capacity management, if you will. They're also trying to limit wear and tear on their folks by keeping them at home versus traveling as much as they used to. The challenge here can be that what we find is companies go in, they go through the sales experience, the sales process with a value-added reseller, and a lot of them are saying, we're gonna do this, and you're gonna do this, and somehow companies still, once they've gotten that sale, they get to the other side, and they're expecting the reseller really to provide more resources than they intend to do. And they end up having to scramble, and again, think back to all of those roles that we talked about early on that really are the company's responsibility. A good VAR is going to tell you that up front, like, hey, you need this person, and this person. Believe them when they tell you that. They are not typically equipped anymore to provide unlimited resources or to quickly backfill a role that you have. Additionally, they don't always have the breadth and depth of skills to do that. Remember, they are solution experts in their solution. And if you have someone you might have someone who has who's been, gone to their boot camp and had a lot of training in, say, Microsoft Nav. And maybe they have very limited business process experience. So you may not have the depth that you're looking for if you're trying to get them to backfill your role in procurement on the core team. So things like that are things to be thinking about with your VAR. They provide a very critical resource to you, and I think they have some limitations that you just want to be aware of and be prepared for. Take a minute. I always like to sort of, as I get close to closing up any presentation that we do, is to really think about what are really critical success factors for change. Remember, these projects, right? Involve a lot of the people within your organization. You're asking them to take on new roles and responsibilities. What are some things to just make sure you remember? One is that commitment from the top that we talk about. You know, we talked about the executive sponsorship and the criticality of that role. I would say if you don't have it, don't even start now. Sometimes you have to because you may not be at the top and you have to start anyway. So do the best with what you have and lean into some of these others. Have an enterprise resource strategy before you dive in. Make sure that you've looked at, yes, we may need ERP, but where else are we making sure to consider our people, processes, technology, and systems collectively before we dive headfirst? Employee involvement. Remember, we talked about the different roles and responsibilities of the core team, the subject matter expert, the users. Ultimately, at some level, we talked about everyone in the organization. Now, not everyone is involved day to day, but communicating in a proactive way with those folks is very, very critical to, again, keeping them involved, keeping them engaged, and ultimately for adoption. Again, regular communication. I can't state that enough. Come up with a regular cadence and stick to it. So the road to change really does begin with an enterprise resource strategy. We talked about this being a plan for utilizing all of an organization's resources to optimize the core business processes so that you can really accelerate the rate of change. We talked about it considering where we are, where are we trying to go, and what are the gaps that are going to hold us back? What are the gaps that we have to fill? The actions required to meet our objectives, and how are these elements interdependent? The resources in an organization that you have to work with, right? The company, knowing what you need to know about the company and where you're trying to go. What kind of culture do you have? How does your culture usually deal with change? And resources such as people, processes, systems, and technology are all parts of the conversation when we talk about an enterprise resource strategy. Today, we really turned our focus on to the people side. And so how do you know if you have the right quantity, the right skills, and experience to take on a large ERP initiative? You probably noticed that many of the readiness criteria that we talked about today that we discussed apply to other types of change initiatives as well. So I hope that as you're walking away today, you go back and you look at those slides and as a checklist for your own readiness in your organization, and that you have a greater clarity and insight into the needs of these roles and responsibilities, and even the qualities and characteristics, those softer skills that you need to have in your people in order to really hit your next ERP project out of the park. I hope you'll join us for a couple of related upcoming sessions that we're going to have where we're going to shift the focus from ERP readiness on people to then also talk about readiness from a process perspective and from a technology perspective as well. And with that, I'd like to take a minute and just see if we've got any questions popping up. I hadn't seen any in the chat, so I'll just check in with Tanya here for a minute.
Yeah, the only thing I saw was there was a question around having some sort of, documentation to help manage this process. Is there something that you recommend, or is there a template that people can download?
Yes, that's a great question. You know what? Let me, I can talk to that here in just a sec. Let me talk to that in just a second here. I think we do, yes. Real quickly, I think this will come up later, but we talked about this. We have these upcoming guys here. Let me see. I had a piece of information about, yes, let me get back to that here. I was just thinking I had it on that slide, pardon me. So back to the question. So the question being, do we have some additional tools and templates? Yes, is the answer. So I actually will provide my email here as we close out here in just a second, and I'll just say feel free to direct email me as we do have some additional tools. For example, a project organizational chart template. Another example would be, we didn't cover it here today, but qualities and characteristics of project managers and business analysts. So it's another little more detail there. And then I think probably having a conversation about what kind of tool you're looking for might serve you as well, if that's helpful. And I'm happy to just spend, even if it's just 15 minutes, talking through that with you. Probably is the best way to do that, because we have a number of tools that might be useful, but at the end of the day, most of the time we're using things like Excel, for that type of thing, or a broader project management tool, and the list goes on in that context. So really it kind of depends on how your organization operates and the tools that maybe they already have that we could recommend using, and a way to use those existing tools. So it might be worth a conversation if the existing tools that we're able to provide don't quite answer the question. Does that help?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Any other questions that you see here? We just want to give it just a second or two.
I am not seeing any in the chat window. Definitely raise your hand, or let us know if you want to be off mute, and we can have you ask your question to the group too.
Oh, for sure. So I'll go ahead and keep going through I've got 2 more slides here, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. I know we're getting up close to our time constraint. Everybody out of here on time. So we talked a little bit about what's next. Okay, so we've got ERP Readiness Part 2, the process conversation on the 14th, and then the technology conversation on the 19th, and then a few more you'll see there as well. I know you're going to get a survey at the end. These surveys really help us out. We really want to make sure that the content that we're providing is useful and value added, and very much a good use of your time. And so that feedback that we ask for is really helpful if you would be so inclined. And then lastly, how do you connect with us? As I said in the Q&A, and this is where some of this information is we do have some additional tools that I mentioned, and we'd be happy to share those. Again, you see my email there at the bottom. Feel free to just direct email me any questions that you might have that come up later. I'd be happy to take a minute and answer those. Also, through the end of March, we're really pleased to offer the user group members a 45-minute, what we call Enterprise Resource Strategy session to discuss your goals and challenges. Now, this isn't your typical sort of free, quote-unquote, consultation, although it is free. But we see it really as a powerful opportunity to find out what's impacting your growth. I'll provide a high-level assessment once we're done having a conversation about what you're missing and why you're not getting the results you want, and be able to make a professional recommendation for maybe some next steps you should take now, and ways you can take those now to get your organization to the next level. So again, remember, when we're talking about ERS, we're talking about people, process, technology, systems, and those types of things. And we want to make sure that, while ERP may be something you absolutely, we want to make sure you're not jumping off that ledge until the other things have been looked at. Is the technology in place? Are the people in place? Are the processes in place? And the like. So we'd be happy to offer that free session to any of the user group members between now and the end of March. So with that, I want to just say thank you. We always really enjoy being with the user group community. As I said early on, we spend a lot of time, although we're system agnostic and we spend time with most middle market solutions these days, we spend a lot of time with the Microsoft solution community, because it just really does, is a product that has always served our very well, our small and mid-sized manufacturing companies. So we spend a lot of time with you folks, and always enjoy doing so. So thank you for your time.
We have one more question, Erin, if you...
Oh, please. Sure. Oh, yes, we have time, of course.
Yep. Of course. What's the biggest mistake you've seen with first-time in-house project managers?
Oh, oh my gosh, what a great question. Well, so let me frame it up a couple different ways. So first-time in-house project managers, again, go back to what's their role and responsibility, and the key with those guys is a couple things. Have they done ERP before? So there's a project manager, somebody who has been a project manager before. If they're starting from nothing, the key thing is to get them some kind of outside support, and this can vary. This can be a couple different ways, and we talk. The biggest issue is being real clear about what skills do they have and what skills are they missing, and making sure to provide the support for the skills that they're missing. And again, provide the support ideally from someone or a firm that can really enhance and enable and train, if you will, that person, so that if they're intending them to be playing the project manager role, not only for that project, but longer term, maybe you're going to be the point person at the end of the day, that as you're you're sort of being efficient in your skill building, right? So you've got kind of a mentor along the way, but you're building your skills along the way too. And so when you make that ERP implementation switch, you really are able to stand on your own 2 feet and have some skills that you just didn't have before.
Wonderful. I think that is definitely key too. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks everyone for attending today. We did record today's session and we will be sending the link out to all of your team members who weren't able to attend. And make sure you look at the upcoming webinars to catch the next series that Erin and her team are doing.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.